Montauban is a commune in the Somme department in Picardy in northern France and lies on the D64, between Guillemont to the east and Mametz to the west. To the north are Bazentin-le-Petit and Bazentin-le-Grand.Bernafay and Trônes woods are to the northeast and Maricourt lies to the south. Military operations began in the area of Montauban in late September 1914 during the race to the sea, when the II Bavarian Corps and later the 14th Reserve Corps of the German 6th Army attacked westwards down the Somme Valley to reach Albert, Amiens and the sea. The attack was stopped just east of Albert by the French Second Army, which then attempted a reciprocal outflanking move further north and forced the Sixth Army to fight a defensive battle, as more troops were moved further north to attempt another advance around Arras, Lille and Lens. On the 1st of July 1916, the German 1st defensive position ran south of the village, along the lower slopes of Montauban per the junction of the British 4th Army and 20th Corps of the French 6th Army ran through Maricourt and to the east of Montauban. The 30th Division of 13th Corps held the right of the Corps area, next to the French 39th Division, which formed the northernmost division of the 6th Army. Signs of an offensive by the British and French had been seen in May 1916, but German military intelligence anticipated an offensive against the Fricourt and Gommecourt spurs, with a possible supporting attack in between, rather than an attack further south around Montauban and the Somme River. The 30th Division attacked behind a creeping barrage and captured its objectives of Montauban and the Montauban Ridge, inflicting many casualties on Bavarian Infantry Regiment 6 of the 10th Bavarian Division and Infantry Regiment 62 of the 12th Division. A German counter-attack in the early hours of the 2nd of July was a costly failure, and the 30th Division began operations against Bernafay and Trônes woods. On the 3rd of July, Montauban was recaptured by German troops on the 25th of March 1918 during Operation Michael, as the right flank units of the 17th Division and the 1st Dismounted Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division retreated. The village was recaptured for the last time 6 months later on the 26th of August by the 18th Division during the Second Battle of Bapaume. Background: 1914. On the 25th of September, during the race to the sea, a French attack north of the Somme against the 2nd Bavarian Corps forced a hurried withdrawal. As more Bavarian units arrived in the north, the 3rd Bavarian Division advanced along the north bank of the Somme, through Bouchavans, La Forest and Hardecourt until held up at Maricourt. The 4th Bavarian Division further to the north defeated French territorial divisions and then attacked westwards in the vicinity of Goudecourt, towards Albert through Salé, Combles, Guillemont and Montauban. The village was captured on the 28th of September against dug-in French infantry and artillery of the Northern Corps of the French Second Army. Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiments 5 and 22 forced back the French 3rd Battalion, 69th Infantry Regiment and then attacked Maricourt. The Bavarian attack managed to advance halfway to Carnoy but was held up nearly 1 kilometer short of Maricourt, and the troops dug in after dark. The 14th Reserve Corps attacked on the 28th of September, with the 26th Reserve Division and the 28th Reserve Division along the Roman road from Bapaume to Albert and Amiens, intending to reach the Ancre and then continue westwards along the Somme Valley. The 28th Reserve Division advanced through Mametz close to Fricourt, against scattered resistance from French infantry and cavalry. On the 29th of September, French counter-attacks at Fricourt almost succeeded needed, and the German infantry were ordered to hold the village regardless of casualties, and the French defensive Maricourt was equally effective. A lull followed, and in October, both sides began to improve the ditches and shallow scrapes dug when the German advance had ended. In November 1914, the 28th Reserve Division was instructed to improve the fortifications in the divisional area, which included Montauban. Chalk spoil from digging was to be disguised by soil or turf. Communication trenches should be deepened to 1.7 meters. Trenches were to be lined by bricks, and overhead cover of dugouts and machine gun nests was to be made thicker. Sanitary conditions in the trenches were to be improved and trench junctions signposted. Units were to clarify the boundaries and survey the areas into which they could fire without endangering neighboring units. Listening posts were to be equipped with bell pulls for warnings and linked by deeper communication trench. Obstacles of barbed wire up to 1 meter high, fencing and knife rests were to be kept ready to keep French patrols out of the trenches. Attacks from 17 to 21 December by the 53rd Division were defeated despite a chronic shortage of artillery ammunition, which led many appeals for fire support to go unanswered. On the 21st of December, artillery fire was available to repulse an attack on the village, in which 1,200 French troops were captured and many more killed. A local truce was observed for the French to recover the wounded and dead, but on Christmas Day there was no truce in the area. In January 1915, General Erich von Falkenhayn, the German chief of the General Staff Oberste Heeresleitung, ordered a reconstruction of the defences which had been improvised as mobile warfare had ended on the Western Front late in 1914. Barbed wire obstacles were enlarged from one belt 5 to 10 yards wide to 2 belts 30 yards wide, about 15 yards apart. Double and triple thickness wire was used and laid 3 to 5 feet high. The front line had been increased from one trench line to 3, 150 to 200 yards apart, the first trench occupied by sentry groups, the second for the bulk of the front trench garrison, and the third trench for local reserves. The trenches were traversed and had sentry posts in concrete recesses built into the parapet. Dugouts had been deepened from 6 to 9 feet to 20 to 30 feet, 50 yards apart, and large enough for 25 men. An intermediate line of strong points about 1,000 yards behind the front line was also built. Communication trenches ran back to the reserve line, renamed the second line, which was as well built and wired as the first line. The second line was sited beyond the range of Allied field artillery, to force an attacker to stop and move guns forward before assaulting the line. After the Second Battle of Artois in 1915, a third defense line another 3,000 yards back from the Stützpunktlinie was begun in February and was almost complete on the Somme front when the battle began. German artillery was organized in a series of Streifen. Each officer was expected to know the batteries covering his section of the front line and the batteries ready to engage fleeting targets. A telephone system was built with lines buried 6 feet deep for 5 miles behind the front line to connect the front line to the artillery. The Somme defenses had two inherent weaknesses which the rebuilding had not remedied. The front trenches were on a forward slope, lined by white chalk from the subsoil and easily seen by ground observers. The defenses were crowded towards the front trench, with a regiment having 2 battalions hills near the front trench system, and the reserve battalion divided between the Stützpunktlinie and the second line, all within 2,000 yards, and most troops within 1,000 yards of the front line, accommodated in the new deep dugouts. The concentration of troops at the front line on a forward slope guaranteed that it would face the bulk of an artillery bombardment, directed by ground observers on clearly marked lines. Much of the new defense building on the Somme was done first in the area north of Fricourt, and work further south through Montauban to the river had not been completed by the 1st of July. For nearly a year after the French offensive north of the Ancre, the area became a backwater and the divisions became known as the Sleeping Army. In May 1916, increased activity behind the British front line indicated that an offensive was being prepared. When Reserve Infantry Regiment 109 moved into the area of Mametz and Montauban in mid-June, the defences were seen to be poor and that there had been far less fighting in the sector. Telephone connections were inadequate and there had been little stocking of supplies and ammunition around the front line. By July, Reserve Infantry Regiment 23 had been brought up to Montauban, east of Reserve Infantry Regiment 109. Prelude. German defensive preparations. In late May 1916, the Somme front was reinforced to 8 divisions in line from Roye on the south bank north to Arras, with 3 divisions held in reserve. The Guard Corps with 3 divisions took over from Maricourt to Serre, which reduced the frontage of the 14th Reserve Corps from 30,000 to 20,000 yards. The 28th Reserve Division, holding the line from Auvillers south to Maricourt. Recruit battalions of troops which were undergoing advanced training were moved closer to the front, to occupy the 2nd and 3rd positions if needed. The 2nd Army had about 240 guns and howitzers, which were outnumbered 6 to 1 by the British artillery. In early June, the German defenders were confronted by British patrols, but the front was mostly quiet until the 20th of June, when British heavy guns began to bombard the area behind the German front line, as far back as Bapaume. Until the 23rd of June, the German front line opposite 13th Corps had been developed into a front position with several lines of trenches and a new reserve line about 700–1,000 yards further back. From Dublin Trench to Train Alley and Pommiers Trench, a communication trench known as Montauban Alley had been dug below the skyline. Along the north facing of Caterpillar Valley, a second position existed about 3,000 yards further back from Maurepas to Guillemont, Longueville and the Bazentin villages. The third position was incomplete and the second position was not as elaborate as the defences to the north, but all available labour was absorbed in keeping the first position in repair during the preparatory bombardment. In the 12th Division area, the second position was only a shallow trench and work had only begun on the third position. The front position had been made more formidable with the strong points of the castle, along with Glatz and Pommiers redoubts, made by blocking trenches and encircling them with barbed wire. Montauban had been fortified and a trench dug around the south side. Bavarian Infantry Regiment 6 of the 10th Bavarian Division held the German front line from the north bank of the Somme to the road between Montauban and Carnoy, with the rest of the division in reserve near Bapaume or in the line near Thiepval. The 12th Division was in support Infantry Regiment 63 opposite the French 20th Corps and Infantry Regiment 62 behind Montauban. Reserve Infantry Regiment 109 of the 28th Reserve Division held the line from the Carnoy road westwards to Mametz. The relief had been chaotic with vague orders and an unclear chain of command, and found itself in the path of the 30th Division. All were killed or captured, and by the end of the 1st of July, the regiment had suffered 1,809 casualties. On the night of 29th June, Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment 6 was sent forward to relieve the troops either side of Montauban, which had been reduced by the British and French preliminary bombardment to about 30 men. Many of the fortifications were found to have been demolished and only 3 shelters were relatively safe. On the following night, an attempt was made to relieve Reserve Infantry Regiment 109 with Infantry Regiment 23 of the 12th Division, but the extent of British artillery fire prevented more than 1.5 companies reaching the front line, the rest waiting at Montauban. Most of the artillery and ammunition of the 12th and 28th Reserve Divisions in the valley north of Montauban and Mametz was destroyed. Opposite the 30th Division, much of the garrison and most of the machine guns had been destroyed by the bombardment. British offensive preparations early in May 1916. Preparations for the offensive quickened and long convoys of lorries and carts moved constantly on roads behind the front line. After dark, trains delivered ammunition and material was carried to the front line. New trenches were dug and sandbag revetments were constructed for gas cylinders. The woods behind the British front line filled with men and guns. The Germans were little able to impede the preparations due to lines of balloons, from which observers detected all daylight movement behind the German front line and directed heavy artillery fire on it. British aircraft flew over the German lines unopposed, photographing German defences and lines of communication, bombed shelters and artillery emplacements, and strafed parties of infantry and cavalry. When German observation balloons ascended, they were attacked by aircraft and shot down. 13th Corps held the front line from Maricourt westwards to Cournoy. The front line was close to the bottom of the forward slope of a valley between the Maricourt and Montauban ridges, and the German front line was further up the slope. Maricourt Ridge declines to the east into the Hardecourt Valley, which contains the woods of Bois-d'Eno and Bois-Favier. Beyond Montauban on the crest of the ridge lies Caterpillar Valley, beyond which are the Ginchy-Pozier ridges. A valley containing Cournoy divides into a northern branch with a pre-war light railway known as Railway Valley, with a long tree plantation known as Tailles-Boissé along the eastern slope. The 13th Corps divisions had to ascend a long low slope, which was almost flat on the 30th Division front, cut with depressions adjacent to the Cournoy and Mametz spurs and Railway Valley, which curved eastwards below Montauban. British plan of attack. The 13th Corps plan for the 30th Division was to capture Montauban on the first day. To the east of the village Nordally and Dublin Trench were to be captured to form a defensive flank to the French 39th Division at Dublin Redoubt. West of the village, the advance was to reach Montauban Alley and gain observation into Caterpillar Valley. The first objective was set at a German reserve line known as Dublin Trench and Pommiers Trench, about 1,000 yards from the British front line. In the centre and on the left flank, the advance was to continue to Montauban and the Montauban-Mametz Ridge, and then the left flank was to advance a short distance to improve the observation over German positions on the left. If the first phase succeeded and the attack further west captured Fricourt, 13th Corps was to wheel to the right by pivoting on Favier Wood and Dublin Redoubt. The third phase consisted of an eastwards advance via Bernafay and Trônes woods to the German second position from Falfemont Farm to Guillemont. When the plan was issued in mid-June, the 30th Division dug a new front-line trench about 150 to 200 yards closer to the German front line and 6 communication trenches between Maricourt on the right and Tailles-Boissé on the left. which was the boundary with the 18th Division. The infantry advance was to be assisted by a heavy artillery barrage which was to fall successively on German defensive lines, and a field artillery barrage which was to creep forward. The short lifts of the creeping barrage were to reach points registered beforehand, so that the advance of the barrage would fall on each length of trench obstructing the advance, each battery firing along a lane. Barrage lifts were determined by timetable, based on the assumption that delays in the infantry advance, to wait for the barrage to move on, were preferable to the risk of it moving too fast and allowing German troops time to emerge from shelters and engage the infantry with small arms fire. The British infantry were to keep as close to the creeping barrage as possible, and 6 artillery lifts were synchronized with the stages of the infantry advance. The 9th Division in Corps Reserve was to move forward to sheltered localities about 2 miles behind the old front line. 2 brigades of the 30th Division were to advance to the first objective, a line from Dublin Trench to Glatz Redoubt, in 2 stages by 8:28 am. The right-hand brigade was to stop at Casement Trench, which extended west from Dublin Redoubt, and a brigade on the left was to reach Train Alley, 150 yards west of Glatz Redoubt, and to attack the redoubt. The 3rd Brigade was then to advance up Railway Valley and at 9:30 am and pass through the leading brigades to capture Montauban. On the left flank, the 18th Division was to advance parallel with the 30th Division. As the final objectives were reached, strong points were to be built by a field company section of the Royal Engineers in detachments from 2 pioneer battalions, which was attached to each brigade. Parties of infantry and machine guns were to move forward to Le Briqueterie, which had a chimney used by the Germans as an observation point, and other areas useful for British artillery observation. Several batteries of field guns were to move forward to command ground between the new front line and the German second position, and a box barrage was to be fired around Montauban to deter a German counter-attack. Preparatory bombardment on the 20th of June. British heavy artillery bombarded German communications behind the front line as far back as Bapaume, and then continued intermittently until the evening of the 22nd of June. At dawn on the 24th of June, a shrapnel barrage began on the German front position and villages nearby. At noon more accurate fire began, and in the evening a light rain turned the German positions into mud. On the 25th of June, heavy artillery fire predominated, smashing trenches and blocking dugouts, setting fire to supply dumps and causing large explosions in Montauban. Variations in the intensity of fire indicated likely areas to be attacked, the greatest rate of fire occurring at Mametz, Fricourt and Auvillers. During the night the German commanders prepared their defences around the villages and ordered the second line to be manned. After an overnight lull, the bombardment increased again on the 26th of June, then suddenly stopped. The German garrisons took post and fired red rockets to call for artillery support, and a German barrage was fired into no man's land. Later in the afternoon, huge mortar bombs began to fall, destroying shallower dugouts, and a super-heavy gun bombarded the main German strong points, as smaller guns pulverized the villages close to the front line, from which civilians were hurriedly removed. German troops billeted in villages moved into the open to avoid the shelling, and from 27-28 June, heavy rain added to the devastation, as the bombardment varied from steady, accurate shelling to shell storms and periods of quiet. At night British patrols moved about no man's land, and on the 30th Division front found German trenches lightly held. Raiders taken prisoner by the Germans said that they were checking on the damage and searching for German survivors. On the 27th of June, a larger explosion was seen in Montauban, and 2 raids during the night found German trenches empty, while a third party found more Germans above ground than the night before. German interrogators gleaned information suggesting that the offensive would begin on either side of the Somme and Ancre rivers at 5 o'clock a.m. on the 29th of June. All of the German infantry stood to along with reinforcements, but the bombardment resumed in the afternoon, rising in intensity to drum fire several times. Artillery fire concentrated on small parts of the front, then lines of shells moved forward into the depth of the German defenses. Periodic gas discharges and infantry probes continued, but German sentries watching through periscopes were often able to warn the garrisons in time. On the 30th of June, the bombardment repeated the earlier pattern, by when much of the German surface defenses had been swept away. Lookout shelters and observation posts were ruined and communication trenches had disappeared, particularly on the front of 13th Corps and 15th Corps. The headquarters of Reserve Infantry Regiment 23 was destroyed by a shell on the 23rd of June, and the systematic bombardment had by the 1st of July cut the wire around Montauban, destroyed the German trenches and hit the German artillery in Caterpillar Valley. The infantry took cover in the deeper dugouts, a shallow support trench. On the night of the 30th of June, the 1st of July, the bombardment fell on rear defenses and communication trenches. Then at dawn, British aircraft filled the sky. Captive balloons rose into the air at 6:30 a.m., and an unprecedented barrage began all along the German front until 7:30 a.m., when the bombardment abruptly stopped. The remaining German trench garrisons began to leave the shelters and set up machine guns in the remains of trenches and shell holes, which proved difficult to spot and from which the occupants could face in any direction to engage an attacker.